We should all want our daughters to be like Mary Magdalene, and she wasn't a sex worker. Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm deeply skeptical, also a pastor. So there's actually nothing historically or biblically that would suggest that Mary Magdalene was actually a sex worker. We do have a handful of verses about Mary Magdalene in the Bible, and I think one of the most interesting ones comes from the book of Luke because it tells us a little bit of insight into who she is. She's listed at the beginning of Luke chapter 8 with two other women, one of them being a woman named Joanna, more on her in just a second, as being the people who funded Jesus' ministry out of their own means. Now, just to give you a little bit of context of who these women were, we know a good bit about who Joanna was because it mentions her husband's name, and her husband, who we're not going to mention here because who really needs to mention all the men's names? They're mentioned in all the other places, but her husband was the person who ran all of the household affairs for Herod Antipas, who was like the ruler of that region. So she was very, very high in the sort of social hierarchy of the day, which means that she had a lot of money, probably access to an enormous amount of money, and her role in society was to find causes and support them and to fund them. And it sounds like she, along with Mary Magdalene and the other person that's mentioned, actually did that, as well as going along with Jesus and the disciples. Mary, though, was from a place called Magdala, and Magdala was a center of industry in textiles. And so what is most likely the case with Mary is that she was an incredibly successful businesswoman, that she was very successful, incredibly wealthy, to the point that she could take several years off, travel around with Jesus, and fund it. Basically, the disciples and Jesus would not be eating if it wasn't for these women, not because they were cooking, but because they were picking up the tab. The other thing we find out from Mary actually relates to the Easter story. Mary is the first person to get to tell people that Jesus has risen from the dead, the first person to find him and to report it back. And to use the words of the evangelicals in their terms, she is the first evangelist and the first preacher. So if they have a problem with women preaching and evangelizing, they've got a problem with the Bible, but that's another video. So to take the woman who was a successful businesswoman and who was bankrolling, bootstrapping, angel investing, the beginning of Christianity, and put her on the lowest rung of that social order, and to say that she is a sex worker is one of the most mind-blowingly, bogglingly misogynistic things that has ever happened in a tradition that is full of a lot of misogynistic things. Mary's the person that we should be wanting our daughters to model themselves after, to be successful, to be wealthy, and to invest in things that you believe in. So what happened? Well, I know what you're thinking. It was probably a man in power who did this. And you're right, it was. It was a pope. His name was Gregory. He did this one sermon where he conflated a bunch of stories saying that they were all about Mary. Now, in his defense, actually, you know what? He doesn't get a defense. He's the man who ruined this whole thing. So no defense. If you want to find a defense from him, I'm sure there's a lot of men out there on the internet who will do a great job of defending him. He doesn't get a defense from this. He did something horrible and misogynistic, and it's something that has perpetuated this story about Mary, about this incredibly successful and confident and powerful woman, this woman who, except for the misogyny of the time, would be called a disciple of Jesus, the woman who was the first evangelist, the first preacher, that woman who took her legacy away from her in history. That's what happened. So he doesn't get any defense, but it's his fault. 591, one sermon, kind of ruined the whole thing. But maybe this Easter, maybe we can celebrate Mary Magdalene, the successful businesswoman who bankrolled the whole enterprise of Christianity, the one with two other women on whom the entire faith stands, because it would not have happened. It would not have been able to go from town to town. None of it would have not have happened without their support and their financing.